Hello, and welcome to ELA Plus, your free supplemental guide to the English language arts. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. In today's video lesson, we're going to read and analyze William Shakespeare's Sonnet number 4. For those of you who may have done a double major in English and Business, you're going to love this poem. For those of you who did not do a double major in English and Business, you might also love it. Let's find out. The lesson begins with a reading of Sonnet number 4. After that, I'll define its archaic language and obscure words, and then I'll offer a plain English contemporary version of the poem so your understanding of its surface level is firmly established. After that, we'll situate the poem within the larger context of the cycle as a whole, and we'll also talk a little bit about its couplet tie. Then we'll go into our deep analysis, and we'll conclude with some comprehension questions. All right then, let's get to it. As you may already know, we have a method of reading poetry here at the channel. The first step is to read the poem to yourself, and then the second step is to read the poem aloud. If you're interested in learning how to read poetry intelligently, please see our video lesson, How to Read a Poem. It's linked to down in the description. So I'm assuming that you've already read this poem to yourself. So now let's go ahead and read it aloud together. Unthrifty loveliness, why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? Nature's bequest gives nothing, but doth lend, and to being frank, she lends to those are free. Then, beauteous niggard, why dost thou abuse the bounteous largesse given thee to give? Profitless usurer, why dost thou use so great a sum of sums, yet canst not live? For having traffic with thyself alone, thou of thyself thy sweet self dost deceive. Then how when nature calls thee to be gone, what acceptable audit canst thou leave? Thy unused beauty must be tombed with thee, which used lives the executor to be. That's Shakespeare's Sonnet number 4. Now with Shakespeare, it takes a little bit more thought and effort to even get a surface understanding of his poems or his plays. So what we'd like to do at ELA Plus is first review all the obscure language and archaic words that Shakespeare uses. Now there are 6 such words in this poem. I've highlighted them for you here. Those 6 words are frank, free, niggard, use, traffic, and deceive. Let's knock frank and free out of the way real quick. They both mean the same thing. They both mean generous in this context. So basically what the speaker is saying is that nature bestows her gifts generously to those who are also generous. And that brings us to the word niggard again. If you've already studied William Shakespeare's Sonnet number 1 with us at ELA Plus, linked to down in the description, then you already know that the word niggard has absolutely nothing to do with the racial epithet that you're probably thinking of at this very moment. No, indeed. What a niggard is a miser. That is, someone who's very stingy with their money. So what the speaker is communicating to the young man here is that the young man is a very greedy, albeit beautiful person who is just wasting the beauty that nature has bestowed upon him. The word use can have 2 meanings in this poem. First, it could mean usury, something lent out for profit. Secondly, it could mean spending. I think that the latter use of this word use is the one that you should use when thinking about Sonnet number 4. And the reason I say that is because clearly what the speaker is saying is that the young man is not profiting from his use, his spending, of all his youthly beauty. Our next archaic or obscure word is traffic. In Sonnet number 4, the word traffic is not meant to be understood as the natural state of the BQE at rush hour. No. It's meant to be understood as commercial activity. As I'm sure you've already noticed, Sonnet number 4 is absolutely rife with commercial metaphor. And we're going to get into commercial metaphor very deeply in our analysis portion of this video. Now there's also another definition or understanding of the word traffic, which we'll also get into, but for now, just keep the word onanism in mind. And that brings us to the final archaic or obscure word of Sonnet number 4, which is deceive. The common understanding of deceive, that is, to engage in deception, is not quite what the speaker is trying to communicate to the young man here. Rather, the speaker is using deceive to mean to defraud, which makes perfect sense given the aforementioned commercial metaphors involved in this poem. Okay, so now that we've discussed the archaic and obscure words of sonnet number 4, I'm ready to present a plain English contemporary reading of the poem. And I'm going to do this on a quatrain by quatrain basis. Let's go. Why, you beautiful, wasteful person, are you spending all your beauty on yourself? Nature doesn't give, it only lends. And though it lends generously, it only lends to those who are likewise generous. You beautiful miser, why are you abusing these gifts of beauty that have been given to you to share with others? Why must you be such a bad investor, using up all this capital instead of investing it in such a way that your memory will be preserved in the future? By only doing business with yourself and not with others, you're only cheating yourself. So when you come to the end of your life, you are simply not going to be able to give a good account of how you spent your riches. Your uninvested beauty is going to be buried with you. But if you invest your beauty wisely, that is, if you reproduce, then your beauty will live on in the future and your legacy will be preserved. We now understand the poem on a surface level. We've defined its archaic language and its obscure words. We've even offered a plain English contemporary version of the poem to work with. But knowing merely what the speaker is saying is not the most important part about this poetry. It is important to get a clear understanding of what the speaker is saying, that's true, but only insofar as it allows us to understand how Shakespeare wrote these poems. That is to say, what is it about these sonnets that has provoked centuries upon centuries of our admiration for them? Indeed, the reason that we keep coming back to these sonnets, the reason these sonnets are the very first poetry unit here at ELA+, is because Shakespeare's poetry is the most beautiful and well-structured poetry in the English language to date. So, to get a better understanding of how Shakespeare wrote this poem, let's go to our analysis. We'll begin our analysis by situating sonnet number 4 within the context of the larger sonnet cycle as a whole. After that, we'll talk a little bit about its couplet tie, and then we'll get into the extensive commercial metaphor that Shakespeare employs in this poem. And then finally, we're going to look at how Shakespeare so very artfully combines both the Shakespearean format of the sonnet and the Petrarchan format of the sonnet in his writing of sonnet number 4. Let's take a look. First, we're still in the young man section of the sonnets. If you've seen our introduction to Shakespeare sonnets, you know that we're going to be here for quite a bit of time. Now, within the young man section, there's a subsection called the procreation sonnets. And you've read sonnet number 4, you know that we're still there because the speaker wants the young man to procreate. And so that's where we are within the context of the sonnet cycle as a whole. Let's take a look at the couplet ties. If you don't know what a couplet tie is, please see our video lesson, Introduction to Shakespeare Sonnets. If you do know what a couplet tie is, here we go. The first couplet tie is the word beauty and its variants. The word beauties appears in line 2, beauteous appears in line 5, and the word beauty itself appears in the couplet in line 13. The next couplet tie is the word use, and this is a very interesting case of a couplet tie because we have the word use in line 7, and it's couplet tied by the words unused in line 13 and used in line 14. But then, phonologically, we get the sound use, or one of its variants, when we look at line 5, for instance, in the word abuse, and then in line 7 with the word usurous. So we see it couplet tied in this respect as well. And we complete our discussion of the couplet tie by drawing your attention to the word lives in line 8, and where it's couplet tied in line 14. So that's it. That concludes our discussion of sonnet number 4's couplet tie. We have beauty, use, and lives. And now we can move on to our discussion of Shakespeare's use of commercial metaphor in sonnet number 4. Sonnet number 4 goes hard on commercial metaphors. We've seen this a lot in the sonnets already, and we're only on the 4th sonnet. And we're going to see a lot more commercial metaphor before we finish. Many readers find this odd. I mean, after all, sonnets are ostensibly about romantic love, so why all this talk about money and commerce? Well, what can I say? Maybe money does buy you love. At any rate, look at all this. I've highlighted all the instances of commercial language that appear in sonnet number 4. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of it. Every single quatrain in this poem has at least 2 instances of commercial metaphor of some sort. The concluding couplet alone has 3. In fact, of the 101 words in this sonnet, 18 of them are of a commercial nature. It's 18% of the poem. You know, it's almost as if the speaker, in talking to the young man and in conversation with the poets of Shaolin, is saying that cash rules everything around you. Dollar bill, yo. Why? Why would Shakespeare have the speaker use such language? Well, remember that we're still in the procreation section of these sonnets. And in these poems, the thesis is the speaker wants the young man to reproduce. Okay, so then why would the speaker use such an abundance of commercial or business metaphor in making this argument? There are at least 2 ways that I like to think about this question. The first is that the market process, or entrepreneurial business activity in a market economy, is by definition creative. Think about creativity in general and product creation in particular. What you'll find if you do is that it's very often the case that the most innovative societies, the most creative societies, are those societies with the deepest commercial cultures. Commercial culture, therefore, to borrow a procreative term, breeds creativity. What, after all, is human reproduction, procreation, if not creativity? I mean, come on, we're creating babies here. And also, I'd just like to say that England at the time that Shakespeare was writing was transitioning from a feudal society to more capitalistic modes of production, so these ideas of commerce and capitalism and markets were definitely in the air. Shakespeare would have been aware of them. There is, however, a more cynical take on what the speaker is up to in this poem. And this point of view appears in Helen Vendler's The Art of Shakespeare Sonnets. Let's see what she has to say. The speaker's innocent introduction of legal and banking language, especially when he speaks about nature's loans, suggests that he can appeal to the young man only in the contaminated language the young man understands, the language of social, not natural, exchange. So here, according to Vendler, commercial exchange is not something creative and beautiful. Rather, it's degrading and ignoble. The speaker, again according to Vendler, only employs this commercial language to get down to the young man's benighted level, because commercial language is somehow contaminated. Communist? So what do you think? Who do you agree with? Your humble internet ELA teacher, or a noted and well-regarded Harvard scholar? Let me know down in the comments. Also, let me know what you think about this commercial metaphor employed in sonnet number 4. No matter what we may think about the uses of commercial language in this poem, it is absolutely the case that Shakespeare uses commercial language in an ingenious way to blend the Petrarchan format of the sonnet with the Shakespearean format of the sonnet. To understand how he does this, let's first briefly review what a Shakespearean sonnet looks like and what a Petrarchan sonnet looks like. We're going to do this very quickly, though, because we've already treated this topic in great detail in our video lesson, Introduction to the English Sonnet. So please check out that video if you haven't already. All right, both formats of the sonnet, the Shakespearean and the Petrarchan, feature 14 lines of rhymed poetry, typically written in iambic pentameter. The difference between the 2 formats is in this. In the Shakespearean format, what you have are 3 quatrains. A quatrain is 4 lines of poetry, and then 1 concluding couplet. A couplet is 2 lines of poetry. The Petrarchan format, on the other hand, is divided between an octave, which is 8 lines of poetry, and a sestet, which is 6 lines of poetry. Now, if you want a deeper discussion of these 2 formats of poetry, again, please see our video lesson, Introduction to the English Sonnet. The definitions in that video are going to be more fleshed out. We got to get moving here. But again, real quick to review, the Shakespearean sonnet has 3 quatrains, and a couplet, the Petrarchan format of the sonnet has an octave and a sestet. Let's look first at how sonnet number 4 conforms to the Shakespearean format of the English language sonnet. Well, we have the 3 quatrains, followed by the concluding couplet. We also have it written in the traditional Shakespearean rhyming format, which is A-B, A-B, C-D, C-D, E-F, E-F, and then you conclude just like a chess game, G-G. Furthermore, note that the speaker asks a question in each of these quatrains. In quatrain 1, he asked, "Why dost thou spend?" In quatrain number 2, he asked, "Why dost thou abuse?" In quatrain 3, he asked, "Why dost thou use?" And then he concludes everything nicely in the couplet with the traditional rhyme. And that's how sonnet number 4 can be read as a Shakespearean sonnet, but it can also be read as a Petrarchan sonnet. And in order to do so, you need to focus on the thematic elements of the questions that the speaker is asking. Let's look first at the speaker's questions that appear in the first 8 lines of the poem, that is, in the octave. There are 3 of them. Number 1, why dost thou spend upon thyself thy beauty's legacy? Number 2, why dost thou abuse the bounteous largesse given thee to give? And number 3, why dost thou use so great a sum of sums, yet canst not live? What do all these questions have in common? Obviously, they're all of a business or commercial nature. Specifically, though, these questions, the answers to them, would appear on the spending side of a business ledger. So in a double-entry accounting document, the young man is going to place these on the debit side. What then of the sestet, or the 6 remaining lines of poetry in sonnet number 4? The speaker has only one more question for the young man, and that question is, what acceptable audit canst thou leave? What's different about this question compared to his 3 previous questions? Well, obviously, the speaker is no longer concerned about the young man's spending habits as pertains to his beautiful capital. What the speaker wants to know now is he wants the young man to give an audit of all the capital that's accrued to him over his life. And this audit language continues even in the concluding couplet, because the concluding couplet can be read as a kind of audit that the speaker gives the young man. If you don't reproduce, your beauty is going to die with you in the tomb. If you do reproduce, then you can pass on this beauty to future generations through your progeny. Just to make it clear for you, here is what sonnet number 4 looks like if read as a Petrarchan sonnet rather than as a Shakespearean sonnet. You have your octave and your sestet. The octave is in black, the sestet is in red. Further, if you've watched our Introduction to the English Sonnet video lesson, you know that there's a volta in the Petrarchan sonnet which appears between the octave and the sestet. A volta is a change, a turn, a change in argument, a turn in argument. And that fits perfectly here with what we've already established, where the octave is about the spending habits of the young man, whereas the sestet is about the speaker demanding an audit of the young man. And that is our reading and analysis of William Shakespeare's sonnet number 4. First, we read the poem together. Then we discussed its archaic and obscure language. After that, we situated the poem within the larger context of the sonnet cycle as a whole, and we talked a little bit about its couplet tie. Then we moved on to our analysis proper, where first we talked about its extended use of commercial metaphor, and then how Shakespeare very artfully combined both the Shakespearean format of the sonnet and the Petrarchan format of the sonnet. And now, I'll leave you with some comprehension questions. Number 1, and this is the most important question. What did you think of this poem? Number 2, who are the characters in sonnet number 4? Number 3, where are we in terms of the sonnet cycle as a whole? Number 4, what are the major themes and metaphors in this sonnet? And number 5, how did Shakespeare combine both the Shakespearean format of the sonnet and the Petrarchan format of the sonnet in writing this poem? This concludes our lesson on Shakespeare's sonnet number 4. I hope you enjoyed it and that you learned something from it. If you did, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Also consider sharing it with friends, fellow students, and even your English teacher. Remember that ELA Plus is a free, regularly updated, supplemental guide to the English language arts. Subscribe to learn more. Until our next lesson, keep reading, get obsessed, and take care of yourselves and others. Thank you.